Hello, I'm Rob with the B, and today we're discussing friction fire. How to make a fire by rubbing two sticks together. So the first thing that happens as we start drilling is that the rough edges are braided away and the drill assumes the basic shape of the hole. At that stage we're just seating the drill. So we're going along pretty evenly. But then, as the temperature increases, the weird thing happens. At a molecular level, and some might even say at the quantum level, at that interface between the two surfaces, they start gripping each other in a completely different way. The surfaces become less like wood and more like rubber, because it suddenly requires much more effort to keep the drill turning at the same speed. So clearly that constant isn't. At some point the whole thing just seizes up and it starts squealing or squeaking in protest. At this point you really need to start working a bit harder. Put in some of that AMP, and that produces significant heat. Now I'd love to show you all of this. After all, it's video, not radio. But most of these changes are happening at a microscopic level, hidden away in the hole there, right at the interface between the two surfaces. To the casual observer, all you're going to see is some old dude rubbing his hands together, breathing heavily, and looking down with an increasingly satisfied smile on his face. Like Hugh Hefner standing on top of the stairs in the Playboy Mansion on party night. That wasn't creepy at all, Rob. And speaking of disturbing phenomena, the next thing that happens that's kind of weird is that speed comes into play. Now you'll remember I mentioned previously that in the classical textbook model of solid friction, the resistance, and therefore the heat generated, is independent of speed. But anyone who's ever done the hand drill will instinctively start speeding up at some point. And it works. So what's going on here? My theory is that at this point the lignin has heated up enough that it essentially starts to behave like a fluid. For a fluid, the drag is proportional to the velocity. Not only proportional, but exponentially proportional. So a small increase in speed will lead to a lot more drag. And as long as you can keep putting the energy in, AMP, the temperature must go up, getting us into the pyrolysis zone. In the last step of the process, the materials have denatured almost completely through a process of pyrolysis. In the absence of oxygen there in that little hole, as it heats up, the materials break down to form charcoal. And we have smooth charcoal on charcoal, which has a very low coefficient of friction, and at that point you just got to keep it going until the spontaneous combustion happens. And this little burst of speed at the end is normally what gets you your ember. But that's all just a theory, proposed by some dude in a silly hat standing barefoot in a kitchen in Africa. Hey, at least I'm not pregnant. To get a proper scientific insight into the whole process of friction, I've decided to enlist the help of an expert in the field, a man with more than 20 years of academic research to his credit, and a professor of applied physics at the Federal Institute of Research and Experimentation. My good friend, Professor Witherby. Over to you, Prof. Prof? Oh, hello, Rob. Am I going to be on television? Well, it's YouTube. It's the future of television. Ah, yes, the future. One of my favorite things. Always looking forward to it, in fact. So how can I help you today, Rob? Over. Well, I was hoping you could explain to us how do scientists go about calculating what the coefficient of friction would be for two particular materials, and then predicting how that would change with temperature. Yes. Well, yes. You see, what we do is we don't. Sorry. Over. I mean, from a scientific point of view, at the molecular level, how would you go about calculating the coefficient of friction between these two sticks? You don't understand, good fellow. These things are all done empirically. We measure it. Over. You don't have to keep saying that. What? Over? That whole over thing. I can see you in the monitor. Like a walkie-talkie. Yes, well, so basically you don't know. What you're saying is that the world's foremost research institute, the way you'd calculate the coefficient of friction for rubbing these two sticks together is by rubbing two sticks together. Well, actually we have machines for that. Over. So you have no way of knowing until you've actually done it. It changes with temperature, but you don't know how or why, and basically my guess is as good as yours. Well, okay, thanks, Prof. Always good talking to you, and always good to see those tax dollars at work, eh? Yeah, we'll speak to you again. Over and out. Cheerio, Rob, and give my regards to your charming lady friend. And that is the really cool thing about friction. If you got a committee of 12 of the best engineers in the world and you put them all together in a room for 12 hours and ask them to calculate how long it might take for a particular dude to make a friction fire with two particular pieces of wood, they might be able to come up with some sort of approximate answer. Maybe. Perhaps an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of hours. But out on the plains of Africa, how many thousand years ago, some so-called primitive, illiterate caveman, using nothing more than feel and some unga bunga and a healthy dose of AMP, he was able to do this consistently, or he didn't survive. Okay, enough talking. We're almost ready to get started. But before we go any further, I have a rather embarrassing admission to make. You see, I'm not particularly good at this method. I've only been practicing for a few years, and to master the hand rule takes a lifetime. So right now, we need to find a real African. And to do that, we're going to go on a bit of a journey. Back in time. Back in time. This stuff's naturally rich in oil, so you don't really need what I call a wick